The House Committee on Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation will come to order. Will the clerk please read in the letter from the Speaker?
Dear Mr. Clerk, I'm making the following changes to the committees for the 102nd Legislature. Representative Mark Tisdale will be removed from Natural Resources. Representative Dave Preston will be added to Natural Resources. Sincerely, Joe Tate, Speaker of the House.
Thank you. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Pahutsky.
Here.
Representatives Hill.
Here.
Shannon.
Present.
Arbit. McFall.
Here.
Pies.
Present.
Martin.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Shriver.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Great. Rep. Pies moves to approve the minutes from a previous meeting on March 2nd. Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved. All right, first up on our agenda, we are going to take testimony on House Bill 4083, sponsored by Representative Rogers. Representative, if you would like to come forward and speak to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for holding a hearing on this important legislation, HB 4083. Having previously served on my Kalamazoo County Commission and 10 years on our Kalamazoo County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, I have had quite a bit of experience learning about remediation costs that are posed to local communities. While we all know that gas stations are the leading cause of brownfields in Michigan, other significant contributors to the contamination of water and soil at these sites are dry cleaners. Since 1931, dry cleaners have been utilizing solvents that use perchloroethylene, or PERC, a volatile organic compound, to launder clothing. What we have come to realize since PERC was adopted by the industry is that it is a neurotoxin, a likely carcinogen, a reproductive and developmental toxicant, skin irritant, and is particularly dangerous for liver and kidney health, even at very low concentrations. Compounding the health risks associated with PERC exposure is the difficulty in its cleanup from accidental releases into the environment. These compounds are heavier than water and sink to the bottom below groundwater sources. It even seeps through concrete, contaminating the soil below floors of facilities. In addition, it is a chemical that is resistant to breaking down resistant to breaking down naturally, and as such stays as a potential threat far into the future. I'm grateful to have two experts in the field with me today, as well as my friend and colleague Rachel Grover from Kalamazoo County Government, who will also testify on some aspects of this legislation. With decades of use of PERC-based solvents and the industry's own estimates that 85% of dry cleaners have had a release of these solvents, we have too many sites that will now fall to taxpayers to clean up. The Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy's Air Quality Division estimates that there are 2,171 known locations of dry cleaners in the state, with 390 active locations and 1,720 that are closed. This is not a comprehensive list by any means, and it is likely that there are many more locations that have not yet been documented. That's the minimum, an absolute minimum of 1,720 sites that may need extensive remediation after decades of use of this chemical compound. While we cannot go back in time and prevent the contamination of groundwater and our soils, we can stop making more brownfields and prevent future discharges to the environment. My bill implements a multi-year phase-out of the use of PERC-based solvents in dry cleaning operations. Beginning December 1st of 2027, Michigan would first eliminate the manufacturing of PERC based on dry cleaning solvents in the state. Then beginning in June 1st, 2028, 1 year later, or 6 months later, the sale of PERC-based dry cleaning solvents would be eliminated. And finally, on December 1st of 2028, Michigan would prohibit all use of PERC-based dry cleaning solvents going forward. This gradual phase-in is designed to give dry cleaners ample time to make a transition to alternate dry cleaning chemicals. We would also establish a fund to assist dry cleaners in the transition via a cost-sharing program administered by EGLE. The last thing we want is for leftover suppliers of PERC solvents to be abandoned, disposed of improperly, or released into the environment. This fund would help return those sources to the state to be handled properly and provide dry cleaners with some financial assistance. On average, a dry cleaner uses approximately 120 gallons of PERC-based solvent per year, which my bill would phase out for safer options. There are several alternatives to PERC, including professional wet cleaning, which, despite the name, does everything dry cleaning does and is safe for all of your dry cleaning only clothes. I believe Melissa Sargent from the Ecology Center will speak to the experiences of a laundry dry cleaning company that has made the transition. Liquid carbon dioxide, high flash point hydrocarbons, and acetyl products sold under a variety of brand names all offer safer alternatives to PERC. With the dangers to human health and the ever-increasing costs of cleaning up this volatile compound, now is the time to act along with the 3 other states that have already begun this process, which include California, Washington, and Minnesota. Since 2019, the state of Washington was able to transition a significant amount of their dry cleaners away from PERC and onto one of the safer alternatives. Minnesota's total elimination of PERC use came into effect in 2021. At the federal level, the EPA has already banned the use of PERC in residential buildings because of the health threats it poses. The trend has been and will continue to be to transition away from these costly and dangerous substances, and Michigan should be ahead of the curve. We do expect a substitute for minor clarification language that merely ensures that Eagle will be the responsible agency that has the authority for auditing the fund created in this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do any of our members have questions for Representative Pies?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For a good number of years now, I've been taking my dry cleaning to a H2O cleaning, which I started going to just because it sounded better, but I didn't actually know what the process is. So I'm wondering if this is the wet cleaning that you're referring to.
I believe so, and I think Melissa from the Ecology Center is going to address that too. Thank you.
Okay. Having said that, after that opened, 2 other this is in Grosse Pointe area, 2 other regular dry cleaners have closed. That one stayed open even through the pandemic. And also, our city, Harper Woods, had a tear down of our mall and resold it to a developer, and there had been a dry cleaners in the mall. And that was a good part of the brownfield thing that they had to go through, was getting those toxins out. Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to be clear again on who else is going to be testifying, so I know kind of what the background to propose what my question, who should go to.
So we have scheduled, we have Rachel Grover, who the representative already mentioned. We have Denise Trabick-Pointer, who is a retired certified hazardous materials manager. And then we also have some cards to read in, so we do have some folks who are professional cleaners. who will
Okay,
be
so
testifying.
dry cleaning, but not like an industry-wide chemical expert.
An expert on hazardous substances.
And who would that be?
That would, once again, be Denise Trabick-Pointer.
Okay, I'll wait for that question.
Great, thank you. Representative, I actually did want to talk, so the bill is structured out to basically phase us out over 5 years. Can you talk about how that time frame was decided upon and who helped develop that timeline?
Sure. We had a local environmental consultant that has consulted to our county's brownfield give us some suggestions around that. I also have spoken with several industry experts about, having that timed release and timed phase out, like we said in the testimony, to give people time to adjust to this, and then also consideration for a buyback program for whatever remaining solvent is, because again, certainly it's not my intent to leave people with drums of this substance and then have potential other ill disposals of it. So having that buyback program, I think, would go a long way to helping make the dry cleaners whole.
Are there any other questions for the representative? All right, thank you, Representative. Next up, we have Rachel Grover, who is the Director of Planning and Development for Kalamazoo County.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Rogers and committee members. I was just going to speak a little bit to the challenges that the perchloroethylene has provided to redevelopment projects in Kalamazoo County. I will give a little bit of my background. I am a hydrogeologist and was employed with the state of North Carolina hazardous waste section for 5 years, moved back to Michigan, luckily, and worked for the Brownfield Authority for 6 years, and that is still in the planning department. And so that is a authority that I oversee as part of the planning department. So I wanted to call to attention a few projects, or the challenges, first of all, to redeveloping these sites. It increases the cost to determine the extent and the level of the contamination that's present. It delays the redevelopment of these brownfield sites and the construction timelines, which then again increases the cost to the developers for redevelopment. It requires long-term monitoring of the vapor systems that need to be installed for indoor air safety. Hotspot removals cost additional amounts and cause disruptions, especially for continuing manufacturers. It stops their business. They have to hold off on their business as the testing and the construction or installation of those systems are put in place. And it also causes loss of business I already said that, due to work interruptions. I wanted to mention some of the sites that we have worked on in the past about 15 years as part of the County Brownfield Authority that do have PCE contamination. One is at 2700 North Pitcher Street. It was a former Goodwill Industries dry cleaning site. The KCBRA spent $68,000 for the assessment of that property, and then the soil vapor extraction system was actually installed by Goodwill Industries as a new employer bought that building as basically a goodwill gesture to take care of that issue. So the new owner does take care of the monitoring, long-term monitoring of that system. 400 South 14th Street is near the former Arco manufacturing site, a rubber manufacturer that was abandoned in the 80s. That required, it actually is near that property, and there's groundwater contamination at that property, and it required, before they could build their new building, a soil vapor extraction system to be installed, barrier to be installed to keep the contaminants from volatilization into the indoor air of the building for that manufacturing facility that makes presses for the auto industry. 555 East Eliza Street in Schoolcraft Township is also a building that was the Arco manufacturing site. That was the one that was abandoned in the 80s. That one is the very expensive property that it took to be able to get that to a usable state. It required $100,000 for site assessment. It's a 100,000 square foot building, and then it cost approximately $150,000 to install a sub-slab system. It really required the entire building to be protected with that system for safe operation. It is now a wonderfully used property for light manufacturing, warehousing, with one of our major warehouser companies in the community. A really difficult project to take on. It was funded through the KCBRA and a Eagle Grant and Loan Program, so we will be paying that loan back over time. But total cost was $250,000. And then the final one was 812 Shaver Road that I have highlighted here. This one I have a correction to make on that. The KCBRA did incur a cost of $18,000 for indoor air sampling and soil samples. This injection molding facility was, when it was purchased, had some old equipment that was still using perchloroethylene, and that was what was causing the indoor air issues, and those have been since remedied and corrected and upgraded. So, but this all was at significant cost to the county, to the state with Eagle Grant and Loan money, and also to the developers themselves. So I just wanted to highlight those. And I think that's the main thing I have. I had, on the next slide, I just have a picture of the Eliza Street facility that was, I have a before and after, if there's a next slide. Yeah, that one. That one was the one that cost us quite a bit of money. You can see the before on the bottom picture and now the top. He put about $1 million of his own money into that property, so. And that's it for me.
We have a question from Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you. Appreciate the background. I know that we also in Marquette have facilities or sites where the only thing was the dry cleaner, and that was enough to cause tens of thousands of dollars to be spent. But what I didn't know, even so, when it's in the ground, it's coming up through the concrete of the facility into the building.
Yeah, it's known as a volatile organic constituent, and some of the other professionals might be able to speak on that, but it does, over time, it will volatilize and enter through the building through different conduits in the property.
Wow. So can you vapor barrier and cap it? Is that?
That's what a vapor barrier system's intended to do. There's a couple of different types of systems that you can install. This property right here has a sub-slab system that tries to keep the air from entering the building, and it has a lot of points that had to be installed through the whole property in order to do that, and long-term monitoring of a system that's placed on the roof of the building.
Yeah, thank you. And then I don't know who would be the best person to answer this question, but I wondered, I didn't realize that you're saying, and this was for Rep. Rogers maybe, and so we could come back to it or whoever, but I thought I heard that PERC is actually manufactured in Michigan, and I wondered, where is that, how many, is that like happen all across, just the extent of that? Sorry if I'm going
We'll have to
backwards.
get back, I'll have to follow up, but we can get you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Representative McFall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a quick question because we, like in the city where I live, we had a brownfield and someone came in and they invested a ton of money, but that was also tax dollars that the municipality was no longer receiving. Is that similar to here? Because I know you're talking about the loans and everything, whereas in our city, that business took care of all of that for the brownfield remediation, but we lost out on a lot of tax dollars because of it.
So, yeah, that's probably a study of brownfield redevelopment in general, and Act 381 is what that's covered under, Michigan Public Act 381. But the former Goodwill property was about a 20-year plan where the taxes were used to reimburse the developer and the authority for the expenses they put into that. It ended after about 19 years, so it ended a little bit early. This site will take quite a while to reimburse. So yes, it's just for the taxes at that property that are used to reimburse the developer or the state or the authority, and not any debt millages. They do not accept debt millages, and there's also rules about how many state taxes and how many local taxes can be received for that. It's after the property owner pays their taxes, and then the authority uses that payment and reimburses them for very specific costs. So it's not just a flat number. They have to show what they spent those dollars on.
So one of the points I was trying to get to was that local municipalities, which are also very strapped budget-wise already, and so to remediate sites in their communities have to continue to lose out on tax dollars. So
Correct,
yeah,
that's correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any further questions for either the representative or Rachel? All right, hearing none. Thank you both very much. Next up, we have Denise Trabick-Pointer, who is a retired certified hazardous materials manager from DuPont and Exalta. And we also have Stephen Colby Brown, who is a PhD chemist.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. My name is Stephen Brown. I have obtained a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry in 1984. I've spent my career for a 40-year-long career working with various pharmaceutical companies doing drug discovery. So I have some experience in analytical chemistry, physical chemistry, toxicology, drug metabolism, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion of drugs, which of course toxins are, in a way, a lot like drugs. They're small, they're small molecules which are foreign to the body, and so they do have physiological effects. As we all know, you can overdose on almost anything. So, I'm just here to tell you about that PERC. One of the major problems with PERC is it is persistent. This means that there are no natural chemical mechanisms for detoxifying it at any appreciable rate. So wherever it's distributed, it will not go away. It will go away slowly and will not be transformed into something that's less toxic. It has very serious health effects. I went through the scientific literature, and I have one of the documents that have been distributed to you includes a review article from 2021 from the Frontiers in Health, Frontiers in Public Health. So this peer-reviewed paper gives a lot of details. It's a review article, so it provides a lot of references for more details on various subjects that are addressed. It talks about the history of PERC, the efforts to, the recognition of the health problems resulting from PERC, and the efforts that have been done to mitigate and regulate it in both in Europe and in the United States. So I'll just have to point out that one of the major toxicities is neurological damage. And this has been shown to be evident in people living nearby PERC residences, or nearby sites where PERC has been used for a number of years. So this is something that gradually, it's sticky too. It's very difficult to remove from soil. It will gradually outgas, is the technical term that's used. So it can provide a continuing threat to public health over time.
Hi, I'm Denise Trabick Pointer, and besides being a certified hazardous materials manager, I am a chemical engineer, and I have been for 42 years, and an occupational health and environmental manager at DuPont. My experience has been sort of spotty with PERC over the years. One experience that I had was with, we actually had PCB in our transformers. They switched it out to PERC. So you know it's a dielectric fluid as well. So my part in that was to make sure they did it properly, but also to write up our emergency response plans and upgrade them so that it included the potential of fire, because the degradation products from a fire with PERC are very hazardous, including vinyl chloride and TCE. So I trained our first responders at the plant. So I trained them on the hazards of PERC and the degradation products. The other thing that experience I had I was at the Mount Clemens plant, DuPont for 22 years. And during our time there, somebody had the idea that we're using a lot of leather gloves, so let's send them to a dry cleaner in Sarnia, and that way we can save money. And so I went to the facility to audit it from an environmental perspective, and it was a very, very well-run facility, pretty new. But I did caution that we shouldn't do it because of the potential of contact with PERC and the odors and all of it, the volatilization and all of it. And I think that trial lasted a month, and we had 3 contact dermatitis cases, because now you've got gloves with PERC held onto skin for hours and hours while they're working and sweating, and that didn't work out so well. And then my bigger experience was the last 7 years of my career, we were a spin-off company. We were the paints and coatings portion of DuPont, then we became DuPont Performance Coatings, and we became Axalta. And I was the global environmental manager. And we had a facility in Europe that used volumes, and we're talking millions of gallons of PERC and TCE, trichloroethylene. And by the time I came there, and actually probably 20 years before I started helping them, they had discovered that they had a huge plume in the groundwater underneath them and also all the way underneath the village. So they had to install groundwater monitoring wells all around the village. They had to start doing some kind of treatment of the groundwater. It just happened that the village wanted to install a tunnel. So they removed somewhere near 14,000 cubic yards of soil, and in Switzerland, they don't landfill much. They didn't know what to do with it, right? So I don't know what the cost ended up being, but they did try thermal treatment, and that didn't work, so they landfilled. They ended up landfilling it at DuPont's expense. They landfilled it. But the groundwater, I was involved in that quite a bit. They used enhanced remediation. I think the soil vapor that has been discussed is probably a better system than what we used there. It was going to end up taking more than 30 years to even come close to treat it. So as has been mentioned, it's very difficult to treat. It's heavier than water. It goes to the bottom, and then it just continues to leach up into the groundwater. The only other thing I want to mention is that same facility was also told they had to reduce their emissions of TCE, which is a breakdown, again, a degradation product of PERC. And they weren't able to do that. And the EU is actually, part of the REACH program was to discontinue the use of TCE, and PCE is now being, they call it PCE. PERC is now being considered to drop from the EU because of the hazards that everybody's talked about here. So that's pretty much my interaction with PERC. So questions for us?
Does anybody have any questions? Vice Chair Martin?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I've heard a lot of these, trigger words of volatile, the long life of it, carcinogen. And I've heard testimony that it's manufactured here in Michigan. How many industries are we aware of how many industries use this chemical? How much is in the state of Michigan? And then, of course, how much goes into waste on an annual basis? Do we know anybody that would be able to collect that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can get back to you.
But there are more than just dry cleaners that use this in industry.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, metal platers.
Metal platers use it extensively, and there are a lot of them in Michigan. I looked up the Superfund facts out of, and it's a US-wide, I'm sorry, I couldn't find Michigan, but 949 of the 1,854 Superfund sites in the US are, PERC is one of the contaminants that they're cleaning up.
That's good for now.
The metal finishers also do, and Michigan has quite a few of those.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there additional questions from any members? No? I'm sorry, Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you. I know we're trying to get through this, but who is able to speak to the replacement products? Would that be you or?
I can speak a little bit to that. That publication I distributed has some information about that as well.
Okay, so this one?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just read that, and if I have any questions,
Oh, could I?
I'll,
Okay.
yeah.
Or I can just give an overview.
Yeah,
A brief
that would be
overview.
helpful.
I mean, the professional water cleaning method is judged to be the best. It uses some organic solvents and detergents that are very safe. The second safest alternative is using supercritical carbon dioxide. That's used to degrease food items, I believe, as well. So, it's just regular carbon dioxide with a few additives added, safe additives added, and you use the liquid carbon dioxide to clean the material, and then the carbon dioxide is recovered or evaporates.
Yeah, one follow-up on is there any climate concerns using carbon dioxide, and you're just recycling carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere?
Yeah, you're just recycling it.
Okay, thank you.
Rep. Shannon? Sorry, we do have some more questions, so please don't. Rep. Shannon?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to speak to that. I was on the issue of alternatives to PERC. There are several that are in this report here. Most of them seem to be just as much of a problem as PERC is. But you mentioned liquid carbon dioxide and then also PWC. In the report, it sounds like the liquid carbon dioxide is prohibitively expensive for most dry cleaners, and then you have a picture of someone who went to the PWC, and it looks like brand new equipment that they're probably not using currently with PERC. Am I correct in that? So,
I think that illustration is for a professional water cleaning.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember exactly, but it is a safe alternative that was installed in King County.
yeah. I guess my comment or question would be that it seems very expensive to move from these alternatives, and it sounds like we might be putting a lot of dry cleaners out of business if they're going to have to go to all new equipment.
Well,
And then in the report it says that the carbon dioxide is very expensive also, and prohibitively expensive.
I'm not sure about the economics. I mean, what I have heard is that these machines cost something on the order of $40,000. So it's not a very high capital expense within the industries I've worked in. So I'm not sure. I can't speak to the economics of it, but many of the states that have transitioned away from PERC have provided loans or grants to these small dry cleaners in the amounts of $10,000, $20,000. And you can see from this publication there are examples of where states like Massachusetts and California and Washington have transitioned have successfully transitioned. So the dry cleaning, it's not a threat to the dry cleaning business. It doesn't seem like that.
I guess I would say that if we're providing $10,000 or $20,000, and one of these machines is $40,000, right there, you're probably going to have some dry cleaners that aren't going to be able to put the other $20,000, and I would imagine you probably need more than one. I don't know. I don't know the business. I'm just trying to.
Oh, I don't either, but I always try to analyze the total picture. And of course, we might be raising some costs for dry cleaning, but consider the costs that the taxpayers are spending to clean up this mess.
I'd be happy to do a little more research on the question, the cost of it and the machines and all that, if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, you could just on the machines for the PWC is fine, but I mean, right in the report it already says that the carbon dioxide alternative is prohibitively, expensive for dry cleaners, and so, and I don't think in the bill it also says that if we get rid of PERC, it seems like it does state that the alternatives will be provided, but until they're explicitly spelled out in the bill, then they could choose any of these other ones that are just as bad, I guess. So I guess, we'll go through the process and we'll get more information and find out,
Okay.
until we get to a point where we'd actually vote this out. So thank you very much.
Are there any additional questions? Representative Preston?
Thank you. How many of the contaminated sites that we're talking about are legacy, pre-regulatory sites that are, closed down, shuttered, dry cleaner sites? I come from the petroleum industry. There's a lot of old gas stations, as was alluded to earlier, that have caused groundwater contamination just due to non-interstitial tanks and things of that matter. With the current regulatory environment, are dry cleaners not held to a standard now that really mitigates a lot of the problems that we're talking about? You know, are we trying to solve a problem that's already been solved in the regulatory process and causing an undue burden on the industry?
I can just mention that, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that that Eagle is working on pulling those numbers. So what's, legacy, and then if there's an issue, they do monitor, their air quality division does monitor dry cleaners currently.
Yeah, because I understand that there's an issue out there, but it's, the technology best practices is always evolving. It has in the petroleum industry where I came from, and I would ask that we definitely consider, if this goes forward, that we consider a longer transition time to allow these small business owners that are under a tremendous amount of pressure to assimilate to the new practices, but at the very least consider whether or not the mitigation has already occurred. And is the risk currently still real? Or are we just looking at the ramifications of the legacy of the industry?
So I think I understand. You're talking about, are there containments and things that are required right now by regulation that might have already mitigated future? Yeah, I'll have to research that as part of this, but I don't think a lot of changes have been made in the regulations for dry cleaners. They still have underground tanks, a lot of them.
With interstitial containment? I mean,
They would have had to do some amount of upgrade.
Yeah, they don't have that.
I mean, just the amount that I saw in a decade in the petroleum industry was kind of mind-boggling for me.
But no, they aren't required to do a lot of that. It's not a flammable,
But it's a contaminant.
it is a contaminant.
Yes.
And yes, it should have interstitial monitoring and double hull tanks and all of that, but I don't believe they do.
But you're not sure?
Nope.
Okay.
Vice Chair Hill?
My question is, you actually had another thought, which is, I have a process question. Given that there's some additional information that we need to understand, could we have a discussion of what the process would be to get that information and distribute it, and then whether we'd have another hearing or not, or how that process works? Just new to all of this, so thank you. And I did think my other question was, understanding the cost to the state of Michigan and to taxpayers, the millions and millions and millions of dollars that have been spent on brownfield redevelopment for PERC. Just in Marquette alone, I know is millions of dollars, just one site. So I think it would be helpful to hear from Eagle on what the costs have been to deal with this problem and have a sense of the scale. Yes, we want to support our small businesses in this transition, and I think it's important that we do so, very important that we do so. But at the same time, I think it's important to put those costs in context of the millions of dollars spent on brownfields.
And just to answer the first part of that, we will be having at least one other hearing. The representative mentioned that there is a substitute that will come before us as well. So there will be more time for discussion and testimony from other interested stakeholders as well. Are there any further questions for the folks we have before us right now? No, hearing none. Okay, thank you both. Thank all of you very much. Next up, by Zoom, we are joined by Melissa Sargent of the Ecology Center, who is going to testify as well.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for having this hearing. I'm with the Ecology Center. We are a nonprofit organization focused on environmental health, and we have worked for 50 years to help raise awareness about some concerns in the environment and how they can affect people's health, and work to make change. So I personally have been working in the field for about 20 years. And so I have worked with various organizations, and the latest, I'm working with the Ecology Center for the past 10 years. So a little bit about me. And so what I used to do is talk to people about what they could do in their home to try to prevent exposures to unnecessary chemicals. And one thing we got talking about to people with is dry cleaning, because when you bring home dry cleaning clothes, it can raise the levels of a volatile perk in your closets and in your homes. And so at the time, 20 years ago, we met Mr. Chung, who opened up I think it might have been the very first wet cleaning business in the state. And we met him and spoke with him. And so I checked in with him just a couple days ago to see how he's doing, and his business is still thriving. And he shared with me his story, and he said that I could share with you some of what he was saying. And so he got into the business because he was a dry cleaner, and he had 2 small children, and he has skin allergies, and so he would get rashes. You're talking about the dermatitis. He personally was getting those rashes from wearing the clothes that he was dry cleaning. And he as well was concerned about his 2 small children. When he would come home from work, he would say, "You can't touch me, you can't hug me, I need to change my clothes, go change and wash." And, he wouldn't let his own children hug him when he walked in the door. So he started learning more about alternatives to perk and learned about wet cleaning. And he went and received training and invested in the machines. And so he has been wet cleaning. His business is H2O Cleaners in Grosse Pointe Woods, and he's been doing it for about 20 years now. So he acknowledges that perk is toxic, and that people know that it is. Either they don't know, or they just use it anyway. And so that there are certain costs associated with using perk. And so he's hoping for, even if there's small scale change and change a little bit at a time, he's very supportive of us moving in this direction. But at the same time, I hear at this testimony, talking about supporting small businesses. And he did say that when I was speaking with him, that he hopes that the state would offer funds for small businesses to be able to convert, because the machines and the training does cost money. So that is, that's what my conversation with him was. And so we were very pleased because we do know that, perk has been a problem for a long time, and there are alternatives. So we don't really need to be using this very toxic chemical to get clothes clean.
Thank you. We have a question from Vice Chair Hill. No. Oh, never mind. Or do we have questions from other members? Representative Pies?
Not a question. I'd just like to say that the H2O Cleaners in Grosse Pointe Woods is the one that I go to. It's about a mile and a half down the road from me. I've been going there for years, just about since when they opened. Very satisfied. Thank you.
Oh, good to hear.
Any other questions from members? No, thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, Melissa, for joining us. We do have some cards to read in. In wishing to speak in opposition to the bill, we have both Michelle Batoya, and as well as Stephen Fry, who it's noted that they would like to be introduced together, so you two can come up. And Michelle is from the Michigan Cleaners Association, and Stephen is from Presidential Cleaners. So the floor is yours. We are on a bit of a schedule, so I see that you have each requested 3 minutes. So if you can just keep it a little bit tight so we can have questions as well. Thank you.
My name is Michelle Batora. I'm the Executive Director for the Michigan Cleaners Association. We'd like to thank the committee for giving us this opportunity to speak this morning. At this point, after reviewing House Bill 4083, the Michigan Cleaners Association is opposed to it as written and as introduced. As we've heard several times today, our industry is comprised mainly of small businesses, which this piece of legislation and this type of phase-out would impact us significantly with a 5-year phase-out. As you know, with the 5-year phase-out of PERC, that would require every cleaner currently using PERC to purchase new equipment. Equipment currently used with a PERC machine cannot be used with any other solvent. I would also just like to mention that currently any PERC cleaner is already being inspected on an annual basis by the state of Michigan and the dry cleaning program through EGLE. So again, is stewards. You know, the state of Michigan is coming in and making sure that our businesses are handling the product properly. So I would like to address that as well. You know, our industry is still rebounding as it is from the pandemic and the amount of time we were shut down. The fact of the matter is that, you know, all of our work-home policies have changed what is happening within our industry as well. You know, on top of the labor shortages and everything else, the closings in this industry are continually happening. So for us to be economically impacted by purchasing new equipment within 5 years, it would significantly change what type of dry cleaners are in your communities right now. Again, I'd like to say that we welcome the opportunity to work with a sponsor on the bill to look at ways that this is fair to the dry cleaning industry and also addressing the environmental concerns. But I would also like to mention, because you heard a lot today about other applications and other industries that are using PERC that are currently not being imposed with a ban. So that's also an interesting fact that this 4083 is specifically targeting just dry cleaners. And at this time, I would like to introduce a dry cleaner. He is part of the board of directors for the Michigan Cleaners Association, and I'd like to introduce Steve Fry.
Thank you. I've been in the dry cleaning business using PERC for 33 years. In the last 40 years, the technology has just exploded. Everything's closed loop systems. It's almost impossible to contact PERC when you're using it on a daily basis. You know, a lot of the questions that were asked, I mean, I could probably answer them for you, but PERC users PERC is not the most common solvent in the dry cleaning industry today. Most of it has gone to other solvents. Basically, in the state of Michigan, I'm not aware of a new dry cleaning machine, a PERC dry cleaning machine, being installed in the last 10 to 12 years. Basically, what it amounts to, if you're a dry cleaner, once your machine is expired and you have to replace it, you generally go to a different solvent, one of the alternative solvents. PERC is by no way the leading solvent in the state of Michigan in dry cleaning. And the stewardship of the dry cleaning industry in Michigan, that's all I can speak for, is very, very strong. Like I say, we get inspected every year by Eagle. You have to, you know, he actually walks around your machine with a detector, make sure these new machines do not emit anything into their closed loop system. They do not emit into the environment. And you walk around with and you have to do a weekly inspection yourself, and you have to log it, what you have. So the containment is, I mean, I think it's top notch. I mean, and I think a lot of the contamination that you have, talking about the brownfields, 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was legal to dump it on the ground. And I'm guessing that's probably what happened. I don't know of any cleaners that I know of that is, you know, in my age that has been started from scratch that has a contamination problem. It's generally, you know, in the earlier years when you could legally dump it on the ground, and now that's where it's coming up to it's catching up with them. As far as other uses, it's used in paint stripper. It's used in aerosol repellents. The automotive industry is a big user for degreasing parts before they assemble them. Dry cleaning is not the biggest user of PERC anymore. The newer solvents basically in the new solvents, either you're going to a petroleum-based solvent or you're going to a alcohol-based solvent. And there's a silicone-based solvent that's been out for years and years and years. But PERC is still by far the best dry cleaning solvent there is. There's no doubt. But it's just been getting, obviously, to me, if somebody is dumping it and not doing it legally, then they should be reprimanded. But as far as the legal aspect of it that you have to, with our inspections, that you have to be in compliance. So it's not like we're just free willy. I mean, in the new machines, they have double tanks. I mean, it's really hard to explain, but the technology in the dry cleaning machines in the last 30 years has just exploded. And I think that's all I really have. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Representative McFall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell me how many, and I assume since you're the executive director of the organization, like how many independent dry cleaners there are in Michigan?
Actually, that is a harder number than you think to get.
Okay, all right. I didn't know if maybe you had a membership number
Yeah,
or something.
yeah. That is a harder number to get. And again, keeping in mind, so as we're talking about, you know, Eagle has a list, obviously, of currently any of the PERC users and any of the petroleum-based users. Those are the ones that have to be licensed through Eagle. That's why the inspections come into play. But that is not, those are just for those two solvent types. So.
All right. Yeah, because one of the things that I know that's happened in our community wasn't with a dry cleaner. It was with a plating.
Right.
He was done. Well, actually, it's in my district. It's not in my community. But the green ooze that seeped out onto 696, yeah, in Madison Heights, he was dumping everything in a pit. And that, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how much that cost, but it was substantial from the state and from the county. So thank you.
Vice Chair Martin.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. So last session I was on Commerce and Tourism, and I remember a bill being introduced, I'm sure by the sponsor for that too. You say you've been working, so how long have you been working with the bill sponsor to get the information from your association, the actual workers, and getting to this point?
No, actually, we have not had an opportunity to meet with the sponsor of this bill yet. We're hoping to be able to do that. We were contacted last week, and from last week to today, we did not have an opportunity to meet with her at all. So we have not been part of what's been introduced.
Thank you.
Following up on that, was there a reason that you weren't able to contact them over the last week?
No, we did contact them. So when we got the email from her office, and I contacted the board and set up a task force to go over the bill as proposed, that was a 3-day time period and then from there I was told that she didn't have an opportunity to meet with us until after the hearing, so.
Okay. Representative Arbet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate both of you, speaking to the state's interest in, preventing environmental harm, while also, we recognize the need to support, small businesses and making sure that we're not placing undue burden. So I'm just wondering if, in your experience, and I know this might be, not a silly question, but just maybe a difficult question to sort of come at in a balanced way, but in your estimation, is there anything that the state is currently not doing, short of a ban of this chemical, is there anything that the state, from your position, think that the state could be doing to protect more in terms of the potential negative impact of the use of this chemical?
Well, again, with our industry, like Steve has indicated and I indicated, our dry cleaners are inspected on an annual basis. So I can only speak to the dry cleaning industry, which is part of this legislation. Obviously, as was indicated earlier, there were several other examples of manufacturers that clearly are still using this product and that seem to have higher significant impact in the communities than what the dry cleaners are having at this point. So.
Representative Pies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You said that a great number of dry cleaners are, when they buy new machines, they tend to not use PERC anymore. So I'm wondering what percentage of dry cleaners do use PERC, and if they're kind of working their way out of that, why is the timeline a problem? And I guess I don't understand why this is as big a deal for you if everybody's changing anyway.
Well, the majority of the PERC users are small mom and pop plants. The average dry cleaner in the state of Michigan has an average of $220,000 of sales. The mom and pop, small mom and pop, which are literally mom and dad working it, are the majority of the percentage that still use PERC. I'm probably by far the largest PERC user in the dry cleaner in Michigan, and I use 70 gallons a year. So the average cleaner in Michigan uses 40 gallons a year. That's based on the sales of PERC from 2022 from the suppliers.
Do you know what percentage of dry cleaners use PERC?
No, we don't, because we don't have the total number of, because the state doesn't track, they only track the petroleum and perchloroethylene users.
And your association doesn't sort of track it?
Well, according to the state of Michigan, there's roughly 250 cleaners currently still using PERC.
But your association doesn't do any tracking?
No, correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the average replacement cost of a dry cleaning machine is $65,000 to $100,000.
So I have one final question. So as Rep. Pies alluded to, and you've discussed, since many dry cleaners, granted, it's more of a burden for the independent and smaller shops, but since many are moving away from PERC, and there is a cost sharing and grant program in this bill, what would be a appropriate phase-in timeline in your estimation?
Again, I think that's something we'd have to evaluate. I mean, again, I know what it looks like currently in this bill. I will tell you that I've looked at some of the other, states that have implemented their ban. I know that Illinois is an example that for some reason wasn't brought up during this, but they had a 15-year phase-out, basically, implementation, but they had started theirs, back in 2003 or something, so, they're coming up on theirs, but again, many of them have also, between the 8 to 15 years is what we're identifying as what California was and what, the Minnesota was as well. So it appears this timeline is significantly shorter than what other states have implemented.
And I don't know the answer to this, and I'm not sure if you do. Did all of those states have buyback programs as well, or grants available?
I don't know if all of them do. I know that Illinois, as an example, did. They did as well. So
Right.
I don't know how all the ins and outs of what their legislation was at all.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much. I appreciate your time. We have some additional cards from folks who are not wishing to speak. Supporting the bill, not wishing to speak, is Megan Tinsley from the Michigan Environmental Council. Not wishing to speak but supporting the bill, Nick Occhipinti from Michigan League of Conservation Voters. Not wishing to speak and supporting the bill, Travis Boskel from Eagle. And not wishing to speak and opposing the bill as introduced is Amanda Fisher from NFIB. So thank you all. We will be hearing more on this bill in the future, so thank you all for being here. And last but certainly not least, the final item on our agenda is a presentation from the Michigan Environmental Council. So today we have Charlotte Jameson, who's the Chief Policy Officer, and Megan Tinsley, who is the Water Policy Director.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to come and present to you guys today. We are going to do rapid fire overview of some key issues that we are hoping to work on throughout this legislative session. So just giving overviews, a taste to the committee of some of the things that we're thinking about, but know that we hope to some extent all of these issues are things that we'll delve in deeper with you all as the session progresses. So again, I'm Charlotte Jameson. I'm the Chief Policy Officer with Michigan Environmental Council. We are a council of over 80 member groups. This number keeps growing. I think more recently we've been saying close to 100. We were formed in 1980, and we are the leading nonpartisan environmental policy organization in the Great Lakes state. Our member organizations range from smaller watershed councils or regional groups that are impacted by what happens in Lansing, but don't have the capacity to have staff here, and so they rely on us for information sharing, to larger groups like the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, who we work with hand in glove in terms of our advocacy here in Lansing. Our priority issues, in a nutshell, are addressing the existential threat of climate change. This is both from a mitigation perspective, so driving down greenhouse gas emissions in Michigan, and from an adaptation perspective of helping Michiganders better adapt and cope with the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing. Protecting the health of Michiganders and combating environmental injustice. Creating thriving, sustainable communities through mobility, land use, and housing solutions. Ensuring clean water for all. Protecting our beautiful natural spaces and critical wildlife, and enacting reforms that create good governance structures.
So on the clean water front, I'll talk a little bit about septics in Michigan. And the title of this slide is actually a headline from a 2013 article in Bridge Magazine. 10 years later, we still do have the weakest regulations on septic systems in the nation. And 30% of our residents use these on-site wastewater disposal systems, which is higher than the national average of about 20. So we have a higher number of residents using these systems, and we have absolutely no regulations regarding them at all. So with no requirements for pumping, maintenance, or inspections, after most systems are installed, they may never see an inspection or any attention once again. So the lifespan of an average septic system is around 20 years. So we've been talking about this problem in Michigan for more than twice as long than the average septic system is intended to last. It's been identified as a potential threat to the public health and potential to spread economic blight since the 1970s. So thus far, because we have no statewide system, all we have is like a patchwork of county and local ordinances. And only 11 counties in the state have any sort of program that does anything really requiring any pumping of septics. And because there's actually a state that had a county that had a very effective program, and it was actually repealed. And that's just one of the reasons why we need to address this on a statewide level. So failing septics certainly fail public health. So Eagle estimates that Michigan has more than 130,000 failing septic systems. Together, these would discharge about 9.4 billion gallons of untreated wastewater. This estimates about a 10% failure rate across all of the estimated systems we have in the state, but that's likely an underestimate because counties that have implemented programs have found failure rates more in the range of 20 to 27%. So Dr. Joan Rose at MSU and her colleagues did a study that showed 64 river systems in the Lower Peninsula that comprise 84% of the drainage area actually contain markers for human fecal matter. And it's important to note that the collections occurred during base flow conditions, so not necessarily high water events. So that means this sort of water was traveling through the groundwater system. So we know that this problem has the potential to implicate drinking water supplies as well. So sewage contains over 100 viruses. And I don't think I was aware of this until the coronavirus, the pandemic. There was a lot of attention because cities were actually monitoring virus levels by looking at wastewater. So through monitoring, we have 9,000 miles of streams in Michigan that are impaired for E. coli, a bacterial found in fecal matter, for total body contact. That means it's not advisable to swim in those waters. So that's 9,000 miles of Michigan streams. That's expected to grow to almost 37,000 miles, or half of our state's streams, once more sampling is collected. Now, the sources of E. coli could be human, they could be animal. I'm not indicating that all of this is from failing septics, but certainly we know it's contributing because of that study by Dr. Joan Rose. And as the DNR presentation that you heard a couple weeks ago noted, Michigan is one of the top 3 states in the nation for fishing-related expenditures. That's a $2 billion a year industry. And here we have all of these miles of streams contaminated with E. coli. Clearly, we need to do something. And we're recommending that we need a statewide code for these systems, uniform standards for what they can be and how they're installed. We need inspections so that failures can be caught. We need to define failure accurately and so that it's consistent across the state. We need to enforce action against failing systems, and we need a funding, of course, to administer this program. We also need the ability for any local government or county to go beyond what may be in a state minimum. Certainly, there are areas in the state that see a lot of volume in their short-term housing, things like Airbnbs and Verbos. Those houses are kind of filled to capacity in those more tourist regions, and those systems can reach capacity faster than you would from a normal family use. And we certainly need funding for homeowners and renters that have failing systems but need financial assistance to address them.
So that's one issue area that we've been working on for several decades, and hope to see some progress on this term. Another area that we want to draw your attention to is wetlands. I think wetlands are one of the most fascinating natural features out there. They serve a critical role in water resource and wildlife protection. Wetlands act as natural sponges, protecting water quality, attenuating flood events, stabilizing our shorelines and stream banks, storing excess stormwater, providing fish and wildlife habitat, recharging our groundwater supplies, and just creating a tremendous amount of recreational, economic, research, and tourism opportunities. In short, they are an amazing natural feature and one that we would do well to protect in Michigan. Unfortunately, we're not doing that well. We have lost over 40% of our wetlands here in Michigan. Before European settlement, we had about 10.7 million acres of wetlands in Michigan, but since the early 1800s, we've lost more than 4.2 million acres. Those wetlands were drained primarily for farming and development, as you would imagine. However, we are now facing new threats to wetlands, things like invasive species and climate change. And our remaining wetlands are stressed. So we're putting a lot of burden on those wetlands to pick up the tab for the ecological function that all of these interconnected wetlands were serving before. So what do we do in terms of wetland loss? One of our primary programs for protecting and maintaining kind of a strong network of wetlands is Federal Clean Water Act Section 404 program. And this program regulates the discharge of dredge or fill material into waters of the United States, which include some wetlands. Michigan and New Jersey are actually the only two states in the nation that have delegated authority over their 404 program. Every other state, the EPA or the Army Corps runs this program. Unfortunately, about over a decade ago, our group and several others were concerned about how robust our program was, and so we asked the EPA to do a review of the program. And the EPA found that it was weaker than federal minimum. And in order to maintain delegated authority, we have to be able to demonstrate that our program is at least as strong or at least as protective as federal law. In 2013, the legislature acted to try to address this weaker regulation, and they did in some ways. They fixed some things that were happening with our wetland program, but unfortunately they also introduced new inconsistencies. And so right now in Michigan, our program is still weaker than federal law in a number of ways. We are hoping to address this, but I will say that we're waiting a little bit for a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, which will impact how we are defining waters of the United States and what wetlands get pulled into that definition. And so before we recommend kind of some things that the committee could look at here, we want to wait and see what that Supreme Court decision turns out to be. There are some other things that we can do. So a number of groups have recommended funding for wetland conservation and restoration. In the recent supplemental, there was 10 million of the 30 million that we've asked for. So we're asking for an additional 20 million now. We also are highly supportive of stormwater management, including green stormwater management, which often includes bioswales and wetlands in more urban communities. And unfortunately, in Michigan, we don't have a strong funding source for stormwater management. We don't allow stormwater utilities by and large. There's some avenues to that, but it's a little bit difficult. And so we'd really like to see use of some of our one-time funding put towards helping locals, governments do stormwater projects.
Okay. And as Charlotte mentioned, this is going to be very high level. We're trying to introduce a lot of things here, but coastal dunes is a good bridge from wetlands, honestly, because it's just another natural feature that we have that can protect us from the worst of things like weather events and climate change. So the freshwater dunes that we have along Lake Michigan and the southern shore of the Upper Peninsula are globally rare. They're homes for unique rare species, certainly some that are threatened and endangered, and they also provide habitat for migratory songbirds, monarch butterflies that are using the lakeshore to travel on their annual migrations. So coastal dunes in their nature are dynamic. They're supposed to shift and change with time as the waves and the wind interact with the environment. So because of that, they're this feature, they're not static. And that's sort of the beauty of the dunes. And we know that lake levels are expected to rise as the climate changes, increase precipitation rates, and models predict that Lake Michigan will rise around 17 inches, perhaps by 2050. And the current practices and the things that we're doing are actually diminishing resiliency to high water events, just like destroying wetlands diminishes our resiliency to flooding and events such as that. And we need to be addressing these things outside of times when high water events are occurring, because those come and they go, and like I said, that's the nature of the dune. But we need to be talking about this and preparing for the next event, because we do know it will happen. So what we see is coastal armoring that's intended to fend off high water that only makes erosion worse. So this might be in the form of a seawall, it might be boulder riprap that a homeowner installs. And what that does is it alters the way the waves sort of move and shift sand. So they can actually scour sand from underneath those structures, and then it becomes like homeowner next to homeowner. And once one homeowner puts in something like this, everyone races to do the same. In the end, we're just making the problem worse. So softer solutions that we can call bioengineering that would work with the dunes, such as installing plants that have long root systems, those can work in a natural way to hold sediment in place. And we could consider statewide setbacks for construction along the Great Lakes. So we're building in areas, again, that are intended to shift and change with time. So one place to start is to restore protections that were in the Critical Dune Act, which were rolled back. Those diminished protections have resulted in things like easier development for roads, driveways, and houses in areas that are likely should not be developed. And there's certainly been some sand mining activity that's been allowed as well, and so we would recommend the strengthening of Part 637 of NREPRA and 353 as well. And while these are places to start and address those areas that we may deem as critical, it's important from the two slides before just to remember that our entire dune system is critical. So the areas that are deemed critical, those may be extra special, but the entire dune system is something we need to work to protect across the entire lakeshore.
And last but not least, we wanted to talk about chemical pollution prevention and accountability, which goes hand in glove with some of the testimony you heard today on a specific chemical of concern. But in Michigan, we've got a pretty big problem when it comes to orphaned contaminated sites and just contaminated sites in general. Michigan has more than 24,000 known contaminated sites. There are additional ones that we don't necessarily know about. Around 14,000 of those sites have no responsible party, and so it falls to taxpayers to ensure cleanup or at least ensure limited exposure to those sites. Reviews consistently show that up to 10% of backlog sites pose imminent public health risk. So, these are sites where we're trying to get to them, but we can't due to other sort of administrative burdens, lack of staffing, lack of funding. But yet we know that they are posing imminent public health risks. And again, just to underscore, we don't have the money or the staffing to address these contaminated sites. And even if we did, there's the question of, should taxpayers really be the one footing the bills for all of these? So in terms of what we've done over the last several decades, since the 90s, to weaken some of our chemical pollution prevention and accountability laws and get us into the situation that we're in now, we eliminated strict liability. And so again, we're relying on taxpayers to offset corporate pollution. We have allowed more avenues for a site to become orphaned. So a site could become orphaned if the company that caused the original pollution went bankrupt, dissolved, reorganized, or if they don't have enough money to clean it up. There's just a lot more avenues for that site to end up on the public rolls. And we've also created this thing called a baseline environmental assessment, where we essentially allow a new owner to file this baseline environmental assessment, say, here's all the contamination that was on the site before I bought the property, and therefore escape liability for that. And then we've moved away from cleanup to limiting exposure. So we don't have a cleanup program. We have a risk management program in Michigan. We leave chemicals in place and try to change or restrict uses on the property to mitigate people accessing that or being exposed to those chemicals. So again, we're leaving a lot of these chemicals in the ground or in the water, and just hoping that we're able to keep people away. So what can we do? And I'm going to quickly run through this. We can bring back strict liability. We can require companies to undertake full and robust cleanup of chemical contamination. We should be requiring some level of financial assurance. We do this for landfills, right? If you're gonna have access to chemicals, you should be able to let us know that you've got the funding on the front end, that you can handle a spill of, worst case scenario. Increasing fines for environmental violations. There should be some stick in terms of trying to ensure that we've got good corporate actors, and ensuring those fines go back to impacted communities as opposed to the general fund. And then finally, and I know the Attorney General has been working on this, looking at eliminating the statute of limitations for some environmental violations. And then pollution prevention. So that's, what do we do if we've got pollution? How do we stop it? Reduce harmful chemicals in circulation, like the bill you heard earlier. There are alternatives, and when there are safer alternatives, we need to be getting these chemicals out of circulation on the front end so that we're avoiding the cleanup and the mess on the back end. Stopping bad actors like Mr. Green Ooze in Madison Heights, prohibiting issuing new permits to entities, individuals, or contractors that have repeatedly violated environmental laws. Why are we allowing folks who have repeatedly violated environmental laws to have access to chemicals of concern? Increased transparency. We should be requiring that all spills of chemicals of concern are reported to EGLE regardless of the size. Require companies to annually test soil and water around their facilities, and require that those sampling results be posted and publicly accessible. And then we should be inspecting and enforcing. We should have more regular inspections of companies that handle chemicals of concern, and then also increase penalties for improper chemical storage. And with that,
thank you both. That was very efficient. I appreciate it. We have just a couple minutes for questions, so Representative McFall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions. One, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer. I actually probably should be able to answer it because this is also tourism. I was just curious as to, because I come from a family of hunters and fishermen, and so do we have any idea of how that impacts that financially?
The septics issue? or
Any of it.
Any of it.
Yeah. 'Cause, I mean, we have a lot of people that come from out of state.
Yeah. I don't know if we've looked at, if anybody's done a full look at just pollution impacts on.
Yeah, I think, so there are a lot of good numbers around how much users spend for bird watching, all these various activities. I think it's harder to quantify. Let's say someone makes a decision and says, I'm going to go to Minnesota instead of Michigan because I've heard their waters are getting pretty gross. Those sort of things are harder to quantify. I mean, there is some information, for example, related to Lake Erie specifically, where fishermen have lost revenue because they actually had to cancel their charter for the day because the algae bloom was unsafe. So there are some specific, but across the board, tying it to people making other decisions is difficult. I haven't seen that.
Thank you. The other question that I have is, you mentioned that there was a county that had a good septic program, but they repealed it. Which county was that? Do you know why?
That was Barry-Eaton County. That program ran for 10 years. It was incredibly effective. I read the report, and the types of failure that they were finding were alarming. And by alarming, I mean raw sewage on the ground outside of someone's home, where a child was exhibiting signs of illness related to exposure. It was repealed, I would say, because it wasn't popular, because it was so effective. People were having to spend money to upgrade their systems when failures were detected, and that wasn't popular. So from a public health perspective, it was incredibly successful, but unfortunately, Forces That Be decided to take it off the books.
I will say, too, that Kalkaska was looking to repeal their point of sale shortly after Barry-Eaton did it. And individuals and residents in that county were able to stop that repeal from happening. So it's not across the board that this is an unpopular thing. But in that instance in Barry-Eaton, yes, there were quite a few homeowners who were upset at the requirements.
So they were putting money over health, is basically. Okay, thank you.
Representative Arbit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have so many questions, but I'll narrow it. Some of the issues that you talked about are relevant to my community. I represent West Bloomfield and the Lakes area of Oakland County. Wetlands, the stormwater, the polluter pay. I mean, that was an issue in Commerce Township, in the Huron River chromium spill last year. But I want to focus on the wetlands just a little bit. My community is really sort of built on wetlands, and the $30 million request to preserve and restore wetlands. Obviously, we're not an appropriations committee, but we could certainly be advocates. I'm wondering where that dollar amount comes from, and if there are certain sites or regions in the state that have sort of been identified as priority areas for remediation and restoration.
So there were a number of conservation groups and environmental groups that supported that $30 million figure. MEC was one as well. That was specifically supposed to be for wetlands that would help with agricultural type pollution around the Saginaw Bay and the Lake Erie areas. So those are two lakes that are impaired for nutrients. They're receiving huge doses that fuel algae blooms that we know are pretty severe. They're visible from space. Wetlands offer a really good opportunity to slow down the large pulses of water that carry those nutrients to the water bodies. So that $30 million is somewhat targeted in its intent to be for slowing down that agricultural sort of pollution in those two areas. But certainly wetlands, there are a variety of ways that we can work those into the landscape. And they're useful in instances in addition to those.
Yeah.
And the 30 million was derived from an estimate for 15 sites. So if we were to do 15 sort of wetland restoration projects, that's what the 30 million came from.
And I know that was in 4016. So
10 million of that, yeah.
Okay, 10 million.
Yeah.
So there's still 20 million left to go. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. We have two more questions. I believe you had a comment, right? Okay, can we do the question? No? Can we do the question first?
Oh, question first. That's fine.
Rep. Pies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Septic issue has been a big concern of mine, and I've talked with one of my Republican colleagues who I know it's a big concern of his. What I've learned is that this is a great concern also for realty associations regarding point of sale and just having some uniformity across the industry, if you will. So I'm wondering if this has support in any other industries. And also, I've heard the argument being made, I'm huge on local government control, except in this one instance. But I know that's an argument. And anyway, if you could speak to that, thank you.
Yeah, I think devil's in the details. I think there are a lot of different ways you could put together a septics bill that achieves these sort of solutions and brings together a diverse set of stakeholders. So for example, I know the Realtors Association has concerns about point of sale inspections. We also have concerns about point of sale inspections in that Michigan, oftentimes people stay in their homes for decades. And so there's a huge number of homes that we are then not inspecting. So just from an environmental perspective, we prefer sort of a periodic inspection. And so that's one area where we do align with the realtors. Again, I think, it depends how you sort of put that together. On the local control piece, again, this goes back to sort of even what I was talking about with the wetlands. What we're saying here is we need a statewide minimum standard that then allows locals to go above that in instances where they need to. And also accounts for kind of variation, right? We don't have the same soil type across the state, but we need sort of minimum standards that account for that. And we need to provide funding for local health departments to administer the program. So we really see this as an opportunity for the legislature and state departments to work with locals on public health solutions as opposed to taking away sort of local control. It depends kind of how you structure it, but I know in the past groups like the Farm Bureau have had different positions on septics and have been involved in negotiations, and county governments and county.
Very sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
we literally have 1 minute, and we do have one more comment. So if this could be an offline conversation for more, thank you very much. Vice Chair Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Real quick, goes to tourism and pollution. State of Michigan is very good at looking for our issues, PFAS being a classic, which garners headlines. But that also gives us a leg up to start working on the problems. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Thank you for that. Thank you both for coming, and thank you for working with a tight timeline. I very much appreciate it. We have no absent members to excuse, so there being no objection, we don't have to excuse them, never mind. And there being no further business before the committee stands adjourned.